Murphy, you selected this episode for us to review. Why did you find it so compelling?
Why did I? Okay, so the Homecoming, the Siege, and the Circle. I mean, it's one long, big episode, and really, you could look at it as Homecoming and the Circle, and the Siege is kind of an afterthought because it's sort of an actiony sort of episode. It's amazing to me because it's something that we haven't seen a lot of. It's really a world building episode. They do this a lot in the first season too, but it harkens back to the last episode. But you don't see this on TOS. There's none of these grand three-parters that really delve into the culture of a specific place. And I think it's great. It's a bit of a slog to get through, but yeah, I love it. I think it's a very important set of episodes for the series. I'm curious to know what you guys thought of it. Yeah.
Well, when I was looking, just to jump with that, I was doing some research on the episode, and I think, correct me if either of you know better, this is one of the first 3-part episodes, so an arc that goes longer than a 2-parter episode.
It's the first.
It's the first, so that's pretty cool all by itself. And I thought what they were doing, again, I'm sure we'll get into this, a lot of great character moments in this episode. Really interesting kind of shifting of friendships and almost allegiances within the crew. And then it seems like they're setting a lot of seeds for really big things to happening. What's up with Quark and Odo? What's up with the Cardassians being so obliging? And there's, an extremist movement on Bajor. So I think it's just setting up so much really fascinating stuff, great character work, and as Murphy said, really good world building. Because it's so, this comes up again and again with DS9. It's so relatable. And it's so easy to see things happening currently in the world in this series. Tom, what did you think of it?
So it was an incredibly intense episode for me for the reasons you guys have both mentioned, for survivor's guilt, for PTSD, for racism, for people who are once great, who are now a little people, as we Americans would say. But the thing that struck me the most was this seemed to me to be a break from prior Star Trek. And what I mean by that was this seemed to be a statement by the writers and the producers that DS9 is going to stand on its own. It has antecedents in TOS and TNG, or even TAS if you want to go there. But this is not going to be based on things we heard or saw in either of those episodes. This will be a new series with its own story arc, with its own characters, with its own conflicts going forward. And having said all of that, this story was originally pitched in TNG. And
that's true.
The basic story was they discover a Cardassian slave labor or prisoner of war camp, and someone goes and finds Lee Nollis or a character like him. And it was considerably reworked from there. But I just thought it was, particularly the story arc, and Murphy, I absolutely agree with your analysis of the trilogy. The Siege, episode 3, I don't want to say it's the weakest, but it does not have the intensity for me, the emotional intensity that certainly the Homecoming had, and a little bit from the Circle. So it was an interesting break. And Megan, your point on the first 3-parter, absolutely. TOS was episodic. It was not a story arc series. And TNG moved towards that. And we saw that particularly on the cliffhangers ending and starting seasons. But here we come out of the box, just season 2. Here we are, Love Us for Us. And I know I've said this in every episode, but the opening credit scenes where they show the model of DS9, I just still find that awe-inspiring, and the music is awe-inspiring, and to me, it's a statement that we're Star Trek, but we're different. And I saw that in this episode. So let me ask you, Megan, you talked about some of the characters and character development. What did you see that so intrigued you?
Oh, there were a whole bunch of things. So, the first kind of right towards the top of the show, Quark and Odo, two absolute favorites, and Quark had just apparently done Odo a really big solid, completely for no benefit, for no profit, just because. And Odo is plainly baffled by this, and utterly suspicious, which I love. And then, he's explaining it to Rum. Rule of acquisition, number 76, sometimes declare peace just to confuse your enemies. But I wonder, is that it? Is there more to it than, like, is he actually up to something? Is this a cover for a grander caper? So I just love what they were continuing the an almost buddy cop nature of Quark and Odo. So I love that. There were some great Jack and Cisco moments. I think Tom, you know this from previous episodes. I love any time of Cisco being a dad because he just loves it so much and he delights in it so much, and that makes me so happy. Really interesting character moments again. Kira put Cisco in an awkward situation. She wanted to do something that was strictly for her feelings about Bajor, her patriotism, that could cause problems for Starfleet. But this time, what's different than when it was for Duet, she had a lot of the rest of the senior staff on board with her. She had talked to Dax and to O'Brien, and they were in her corner to make that go forward. So I thought that was a really interesting change. And I've got some more thoughts about O'Brien and Kira together, but we'll get to those when we get to the rescue.
Murphy?
Yeah, you raise a good point about, first of all, Odo and Quark. I mean, that's the classic relationship that goes on. This sort of, odd couple that can't stand each other.
That was the word.
The interesting thing is, in the second episode, in this, in I think the Circle, and we'll get to it in the next episode. But there's a good point where Odo is the first person that Quark tells when he gets his information. He doesn't run to Cisco. He runs straight to Odo and says, "We've got to get out of here." Like he thinks of him as someone that, even if he's not going to bring him with him, he still cares about the guy. And with Kira, you see her relationships sort of blossoming with the crew. I liked at a certain point, and this harkens back into the episode right before this, which is the episode called Hands of the Prophets, which introduces Kai Wynn and sets up the whole Bajor on the precipice of civil war kind of thing. There's really good moments with O'Brien and Odo, and they sort of also become this weird sort of buddy relationship, and they like to solve crimes together. It's very strange. But yeah, I like that Kira runs everything by Dax and Bashir and everybody. It shows that she's starting to have these are people that I can trust, and I want their opinions when I'm about to do something that means a lot to me. It's really interesting,
So, actually, my favorite scene with Quark was when the woman gave him the earring.
What is their history?
This complete dish of a starship or a freighter captain, and Quark clearly wants to have his ear stroked. But she's not up for it right then. But the clue that she dangles in front of him, I think he immediately understands its value. And he, because Major Kira immediately understood what it was when he presented it to her. That was the one of the things that struck me. The way Kira talked to the other senior executive members, actually, I thought that showed her growth as an executive officer. When you're going to go to your boss and he's probably going to say no, you try to get as many allies lined up to outflank him or her as necessary. And so it's not simply insubordination, but the example I would point you to is O'Brien, where they actually had the beginnings of a plan in place to do this. If Cisco said, well, give me some more information. What are you thinking about doing? How are you going to do it? And we saw that she had engaged in O'Brien, and O'Brien just hates Cardassians. And anything he can do to strike back at them, he's going to do. And so we had that going on as well. the I need to talk about though I'm even more confused, or I'm more drawn to the difference in not philosophy, but what everyone's interest is here. It strikes me that I'm confused about what the Federation thinks of Bajor. Is Bajor possibly being evaluated for candidacy in the Federation, or is DS9 now the guardian of the wormhole? And it is directly in the Federation's interest to control that, just as it would be the Cardassians' interest. So is there a dynamic tension there? I am very concerned about the Bajorans and their racism. If I can remember their backstory from TNG, they were 10,000 years civilization that, if they didn't rule the galaxy, were one of the galaxy's leading lights, and somehow they crumbled as a civilization to the point where we found them as under the thumb of the Cardassians in the occupation in TNG, and now they have their own freedom again. But to come out of that sort of experience, and the first thing out of their mouth is Bajor for the Bajorans, period. You will leave now. And to have this dynamic tension seems to me to be antithetical to the values of the Federation I was brought up with. So I really wanted to get your thoughts on that tension. And of course, it plays out more in the next couple of episodes. But that, and of course, the date Jake has, I knew where that was going the minute it happened. I don't know if that ever happened to you, Megan, but my wife told me once she wanted to date a man or a boy, I guess at the time, who was South Asian, and her father just said no, period. And, I grew up in the South, so I certainly know what racism is. But that's what I saw from the Bajorans, just a level of racism that seemed to me to be antithetical to the Federation.
Yeah. Yeah, you raise a really good point there, specifically with the Bajorans and the backstory in TNG, where they're sort of portrayed to be scattered to the winds, and we don't actually ever really see anything about the planet itself. There's a moment where Essa says, we're a culture that people that brought art and culture to hundreds of planets. We don't deserve to be victims. And I think there's a confusion after the occupation. The occupation went on for half a century, and I think there's a confusion between self-determination and, sort of outright xenophobia. And you see this again. You see this in Hands of the Prophets, and this is sort of stoked by the religious elements and people vying for power. But the Bajorans also, before the occupation, and they get into this in later episodes too. There's a really important episode where this guy from the past shows up. He says he's the emissary, and try to reverts them back to an old way. Bajor used to have something called Dejaras, and they are a very strict form of family caste system. Really, really rigid and autocratic, and it doesn't mean that they weren't, cultural and artistic, but very strictly enforced. And Kira says that, they gave them up to fight the Cardassians. They all became soldiers. But you talk about the civilization sort of crumbling, and I can see a people like the Bajorans sort of under a case system like that, kind of grinding to a halt culturally, and opening themselves up to decline and inviting occupation from a neighboring power.
Can we turn to...
I just wanted to
Go ahead,
note about that a little bit, because I think kind of what you see on Bajor with this new freedom, but the planet was left in shambles. The economy was, the social structures, the caste system, which had been kind of their previous way of having culture, that's really analogous to what happens in a lot of places in the world that, do undergo a loss in war, a liberation of some kind. When things don't suddenly get good, cultures find someone to blame. And, really often it it turns out to be really, isolationist or nationalistic tendencies. So I think it's not good that it's happening, but I think it's very understandable that it's happening. The Cardassians are gone, but things didn't immediately get better. it's got to be someone's fault. And if the government doesn't seem to be doing anything about it, then that's kind of the perfect seeds for an extremist group to grow and take power with. So I thought it was really, again, not good, but thematically appropriate for what is happening. And in terms of how that helps them and DS9 interact with the rest of the Federation, I feel like what they were really doing here is starting to seed the fact that DS9 is becoming something separate from the mainstream Federation. I think you see it in the relationships that Kira's building with senior crew and how they're on Team Bajor. And Cisco's growing more, because Cisco's the emissary. And so DS9, I think, is becoming something separate from the Federation. I think that's going to be causing a lot of challenges for different crew members, over the next number of seasons. So I thought really, really fascinating.
Well, it's the movement away from the sort of utopian ideal that you see in previous Trek, where we've abandoned concepts of faith and we've abandoned concepts of economy and we work to better ourselves. And the cast repeatedly says this. I mean, Jake says that to someone at some point. But on the frontier, these mechanics of utopian idealism don't work, especially when you're dealing with people who have been brutalized or have a different culture. And you see this in the conflict. This is the sort of darker tone of DS9 that I find a lot of people find it hard to take. You see it when Cisco talks to Quark. Quark gets branded and Bashir's treating him terribly while he's, fixing his face. And then Quark is like, well, I want to be compensated or have something done. And Cisco tears his head off. I mean, it's completely inappropriate and extremely prejudicial and racist. And this will come up again and again in how they treat the Ferengi. But yeah, it's definitely a different set of values than what we've seen before.
I wanted to talk about the rescue of Linalis because I had a lot of trouble with that scene, particularly the start of it, where they get the Cardassian to drop the force field. And they did that by either O'Brien pimping Kira or trafficking her or something her to proposition the Cardassian soldier. And it was clear from her dialogue, it wasn't, hey, you're looking for a good time. It was, this is how you get a Cardassian. And she knew how to do it. And she knew what he wanted. And there was probably women on Bajor who were, doing that on a regular basis. So that part of it was disturbing to me. The rescue of Linalis, you begin to see the character and his internal struggles where he basically doesn't want to be rescued and they have to drag him out of there. And some people make the ultimate sacrifice. And I'm sure the Cardassians executed them on the spot after the shuttlecraft left. I can't imagine there were too many Bajorans to send home, all the way to Gul Dukat's lovely mea culpa. I was shocked to find out we had a prisoner of war or a prisoner camp on one of our planets. Just shocked, which I have to say I enjoyed the humor in that, not really understanding a foreshadowing of what he was trying to say, which was, don't look too hard. We may be doing something we don't get caught at. Did any of that resonate with you guys, or anything about the rescue struck you all? Megan?
Absolutely loved the rescue. And I the part where I have kind of in big letters in my notes here, where, when, and how did O'Brien learn to be such a greasy procurer? Because I want that story. And I just think, did they plan this in advance? But that's kind of beside the point, because the thing is, I saw that and I loved it because oldest trick in the book. Oldest trick, and there's like a subgenre of literature kind of about that trope of using this promise of, say, paid sex work as a way into positions of power for people that typically don't have them. So it was kind of unnerving to see Kira and O'Brien playing those roles, but that it was a tactic being used, I really liked, because it worked, and it always works. Is kind of thing. That's one of the ways in, if you need a way in somewhere, as distasteful as that might be or feel. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And it does definitely put a light on kind of some of the interactions that Cardassians and Bajorans would have had over the years and how that might have played out. When they got into Tom, I saw very many of the same things you did with the rest of the rescue of meeting Lee. And it's interesting because as soon as we met him, it was very difficult to tell. There was no real immediate sign that he is this war hero. He was behaving exactly as a freedom fighter who cared most about his people would, and there wasn't any real sign yet that he was having these conflicts and these doubts. So I thought all a very interesting and suspiciously easy rescue, all things considered. What do you think, Murphy?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an uncomfortable scene. It's a testament to O'Brien's ability to sort of kind of play the criminal. And this comes back again later when he sort of does his undercover work with the O'Brien Syndicate. And I've always wondered why a random, mechanic got selected for that. But it's obviously he has some background in this. He's so good in that sort of, like you said, greasy kind of procure role. And Kira approaches the Cardassian soldier aggressively. And this is interesting. You find out later, again, with O'Brien, there's a female Cardassian scientist comes to the station and basically spends the entire episode belittling and sort of making fun of him and trying to get his goat until he realizes that she's completely been hitting on him the whole time. And it's explained that the way Cardassians date is basically by driving each other crazy, by just belittling and starting fights and arguing with each other incessantly. So Kira obviously knows this tactic and is deliberately insulting the Cardassian. If she'd appeared meek or standoffish, this wouldn't have been a come on in the same way. I also think with
that great point.
Yeah, Lee Nallis, his sort of introduction, and I love the fact that they got Richard Beymer to play Lee Nallis. I mean, just amazing. I love him in West Side Story, and I love him in Twin Peaks, and I love him in this. Just amazing. But his sort of, he's there as kind of a nobody. He's sort of, scruff and working in the dirt. And his first consideration for everybody, like you said, he's more concerned about the other people there. And whether that speaks to his lack of self-confidence about the war hero he should be, or an actual inner virtue, you're going to see later on. But it's a harrowing scene, quite violent in its in its sort of rescue, the way they just are forced to leave people behind like that. It's pretty poignant.
So how about the mea culpa from Golda Cott? Any thoughts on that?
I don't buy it.
Yeah, I don't buy it.
The scene where Lee Nallis is his first address to the Bajorans on DS9, I thought that was a pretty good indication of how he is thought of. Obviously, Bashir tries to engage him, and he says, "I don't want to talk." Leading up to when he confesses or tells Sisko the true story, he's a resistance fighter subject of being executed if he's caught by a Cardassian. And he kills a Cardassian, whether the guy's in his underwear coming out of the water or not. To me, that's what a resistance fighter does. And he should make no apology for doing that. I don't think he apologizes for that. He apologizes for the mythos created for that. When the legend beats the fact, print the legend. And they needed a legend and they needed a hero. So I thought that's a role he should have fulfilled, but he was clearly not comfortable. How did you guys kind of interpret all that? Now I have to add, I thought I saw PTSD in there as well. We didn't see nightmares, him trying to sleep, but I bet that night when he got a warm bed, he was sleeping on the floor because that bed was way too soft.
Yeah.
I think it was so interesting because obviously he was part of the resistance. And even if he doesn't feel he's like earned the legend that was built up around him and all of these things that, were attributed to him that he never did, I think you're absolutely right, Tom. The legend was necessary. But trying to imagine kind of as a person what it would be like to have that built up around you when you feel like you really took one opportunistic shot and happened to succeed because, the guy that you caught happened to be a particularly big bad. I think, it must have been so difficult to know that conflict of this legend is good and it is helping, and it is not true and it does not reflect me and my reality. I think that would be a really difficult way to live. And, even when he mentioned when he was sent to the prison camp, his mere presence there seemed to help galvanize, his fellow countrymen. I don't blame him for wanting to run away. Because that's really big shoes to fill. And even if he was a resistance fighter, signing up to kind of do your bit is not the same as signing up to be Captain America. He probably wasn't Steve Rogers, if I can make the analogy. He was just a guy, and this was thrust upon him. And I feel a lot of empathy for how difficult that would be.
So that moves us up to the ending. The ending I thought was a great setup for the next episode, but the way Linalis, I think the provisional government is scared to death of him, and they realized they had to get him off Bajor.
Oh yeah,
and they had to, they were going to send him to DS9. I thought that was a fairly shrewd move, but Murphy, it may play into your sort of opening remarks that I would have even gone further that DS9 isn't Bajoran either. It's its own, it's becoming its own thing. It's becoming its own culture. It's becoming its own melting pot because of the disparate interests involved here. And so I had thought by sending him, they were clearly trying to get him off Bajor, succeeded there. But I'm not sure he would have been the liaison that they would have expected, because I don't think he would have stood up to Cisco the way Kira started and learned to stand up to Cisco, as evidenced by the opening of this episode. And then to have Kira relieved, resigned to pursue other opportunities in the business world, unnamed, unknown opportunities, was a pretty big slap. What did you guys think about that?
I just had the thought right now that explains for me the Cardassian apology, because that provisional government was weak. They knew they didn't have the power. They couldn't galvanize all of Bajor together. Maybe they knew that slave camp was still in operation and that this hero of the resistance was being kept there. And part of the exit of Cardassia from Bajor involved, hey, take this guy off our hands because he's going to take the power that we want. And that would explain the hasty apology to cover their tracks there. That just occurred to me, and I think that might.
It's an interesting idea.
What do you think, Murphy?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I mean, the provisional government or some faction of the provisional government are working within the Chamber of Ministers obviously is in collusion with the Cardassians. The Cardassians definitely have an intelligence network left on Bajor. So it's very possible. I mean, I think too, when you're talking about whether Nalis would be, whether Lee would be a decent attaché to the station and whether he'd stand up to Cisco. Well, clearly he wouldn't. I mean, when he speaks to Cisco, when he talks about his past, he says, I was the member of a minor resistance cell. The name's not important. This is how he thinks of himself. He thinks of himself as being an unimportant figure. When he talks about the legend growing, he downplays it and says, it's everybody else that says this. I try to deny it. I don't want to be this. He doesn't have that sense of, bravado that Kira does, that fierceness that she does. He's very meek. He's very contemplative. Which is also very similar to Vedic Barile that you see in the previous episode and you see in the next one. It's a very interesting sort of split, and it's neat to see but yeah, I don't think he would have worked. I think he would have drifted off somewhere, and he would have ended up working some random, again, management position somewhere. But yeah, I like the idea that maybe they had to get him off world. It's interesting.
So, I guess maybe some final thoughts on this episode. Why don't we go in reverse order and let me go first?
Yeah.
And that way we can end up with you, Murphy.
Okay.
My final thoughts were, I probably love this episode more now after listening to you guys talk about it, because you saw so much more and deeper in areas that I hadn't explored. That just fills in for me the depth of the script writing in this episode. I saw levels of acting and levels of emotion that I hadn't seen in prior episodes. I didn't even touch the first Jake Sisko scene, Megan, that you did. But when Jake says, "Dad, you're clearly not ready for this talk," his dad is clearly not ready for this talk. And that was a great line. The Kira immediately wanting to rescue Lignalis immediately when she sees the earring, I thought really spoke a lot about her. And I'm going to talk about it a lot more in the next couple of episodes about, is she transitioning from being a resistance fighter to something else? Well, in this episode, she's still a killer.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw that, and we explored that a little bit in Duet. I saw a little growth in Dr. Bashir when he was treating the patients. I thought I saw a little more professionalism than I had seen. Quark going to Kira's quarters, I thought was really fun, because it shows just the utter contempt Kira has for Quark. And Murphy, to your point, I'm not sure if it's racism against the Ferengi, or she still views the Ferengi as part of the occupation. Or at least they
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, they were there when the Cardassians were there making money. I had no idea there was a rule of acquisition to confuse your enemy by telling the truth. And there's an even better one for me in the Siege episode that I'll hold off for that time. But I'm beginning to reevaluate the rules of acquisition. I thought they were simply that, business terms and conditions, but they're actually an entire lifestyle. So I may have to rethink that, and there may be a compliance angle to that in a podcast coming down the road. So I just thought it was a great episode. It set up the circle so well. It made me care about the characters more. But I'm going to go back to and end with what I started with. This, to me, put a print down, or a step across the line, that whatever we're creating with DS9, it's different. And it's going to be different, and we're going to go in different directions. Yes, we'll have Star Trek. We'll always have Star Trek as an antecedent, but we're going to be something different. And Murphy, to your point, yeah, it is darker, and that's why I loved it from that darkness. So, Megan.
Yeah, I think, Tom, you said the perfect word to describe this episode, and it was tension. And the tension between different people, the tension between different governments, between even competing needs and priorities among all of these people and all these different groups. So I thought, again, immensely fascinating. Murphy, it was a great choice. And I think I've said pretty much all I have to say about it, just except on that last point, Tom, that this is kind of one of DS9's Take a Stand episodes. It is kind of interesting, and Murphy, I'd love to hear what you think about this. This was happening at the same time as Babylon 5 was coming out, if I'm remembering correctly, which has a similar tone that's kind of getting more into...
I was wondering when we were going to get into this.
Why don't I hand it right over to you?
No. I want you to finish your thought, seriously, because
that was pretty much it, because it's just they take the kind of same approach of, these are actual real individuals doing extremely hard things under very challenging circumstances. Let's talk about it. And that, for me, is the ultimate Trek. It's board meetings about ethics in space. And that's what I'm here for. and that's what I think they're doing, and I love it.
Yeah, I mean
Perfect.
it's a soap opera. It essentially is it's a serialized space opera. That's the format that they're going towards. And yeah, I mean, I was wondering how long we could talk about DS9 without making parallels to Babylon 5, and it is definitely a subject, but it's I think it's its whole entire subject that needs to be discussed. So suffice to say, yes, there are a lot of parallels. In the next episode, there is a very stark B5 reference that I wanted to discuss, but yeah, I think it's more like you said, it's board meetings in space, you know, and it's a lot more dialogue. There's some really good. You only see Jero Esse, Frank Langela's character, a little bit in this one, but he has his conversation with Cisco kind of mirrors that sort of sparring Cardassian one that you'll see later. No, I think it's a fantastic episode. So tense in a lot of ways. And it harkens back again really well to the first season finale and going ahead as that marvelous 3-parter that we haven't seen. You know, it's yeah, it's great. It's great. It's one that I really wanted to do. I know it's long, but it's pivoting away from that awkward first season and going into something more serialized that we haven't seen before. So yeah, no, I like it a lot.
All right. Well, this is great. And I hope our listeners will join us on our next episode where we take up the circle and the siege. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.